would you describe the individual self in the Old Testament? Not easily. The individual self is a complex, layered, conflicted organism in the image of God that is made for love of God and love of neighbor. And that love of God and that love of neighbor depends upon the honoring of all of the complex layers and dimensions of the self. I think that biblical understanding of a complex self is the propeller for Sigmund Freud's work. Freud was a Jew, and Freud understood from the rabbis that you have to process the conflicted, complex self in order to arrive at freedom and wholeness and shalom. And I think that our whole Western tradition of the self wants the self not to be complex, not to be conflicted, not to be complex, not to be in the image of God, not to be lived back toward God, not to be lived toward neighbor. So we arrive at an encased individual that is a betrayal of the whole self that we are created to live in community. That's what I think. That's a lot, but I think that's right. I don't know whether you want to pursue that. I often think when I'm sitting in church, why don't we use the lament songs? But other than that, I often think in church, we're talking about stuff here this morning that is not being talked about anywhere else in Anderson Township. That's what we do. And what we do is we talk about the complex self in relationship to God and neighbor. Because even for our timidity about that, we kind of acknowledge that about us. So we do praise, which is back to God. We do confession, which is an acknowledgement of our not loving God with our whole heart or our neighbor as ourselves. All of the maneuvers of the liturgy are a processing of this complex self in the presence of God and neighbor that the world outside the church does not want to know about. And that's an amazing gift, even though we do not do it very well, I think. We could do better if we took our tradition more seriously, but we do have that sense of ourselves.